And I believe we're live. So welcome everyone to the IPLD Sync. This is the 20th of June, 2022. And we're going to do a quick run around of things that have been happening in IPLD land for the folks that are here on the call. And I'm going to go first because I'm first in the little doc. So the big thing that I have to talk about is I tagged a 0.17.0 of IPLD Prime, Go IPLD Prime. And the changelog has all the details for that. So if you are interested in, if you are a Go programmer, you should have a look at that. And I'm going to quickly have a look at the highlights. So there's three things that I identified as potentially breaking or disruptive changes. They're unlikely to be things that most people run into. There's now a check for undefined CIDs in the codex. If you put in an undefined CID, so a zero value CID, it will error at you because it doesn't have a way of encoding them properly. And so that should have always been the case because you won't get valid bytes out the other end anyway. BindNode has an earlier check for if you use pointer to pointers. There was a case where we were doing that, and the error comes later. Sometimes it doesn't come at all, but it's just a check because it really does need to pointer to pointer. Sorry, just a pointer, not a pointer to a pointer. And Go 1.16 has been dropped from the CI system, so that's sort of a build change. It doesn't mean it's not supported, but it probably slip over time. So some highlights in there. This release has a ton of work in BindNode. So Daniel did a heap of work to get BindNode up to scratch for to be productionized, really, so we could use it in production systems. So he did a lot of fuzzing all the way through to the codecs and schemas and things. And he fixed up a whole bunch of panics that were there in the sort of early version of it. So BindNode is pretty solid now, and we've been working on it since. The schemas, as I said, have also had some work done onto them. The schema DMT and the DSL. So the DMT is the internal representation of it. Has been improved so that it now the schema stuff in Go IPLD Prime will cover around 90% of the schema specification. So it's and then that's the 90% most used. So the bits that aren't quite done are the bits that hardly ever get touched. So we're pretty close to full support there. The patch, Eric's patch feature got merged. It's the initial version of that. It's very basic and initial. It goes with the spec that also got merged. So that's now tagged. There's a couple of things around codecs, like DAG-CBOR is now properly strict with extraneous data after a valid object. There's an experimental determinism flag you can use for the codec for decoding. That's fairly basic, but it can be expanded over time. And there's also another option for DAG-JSON to allow it to go beyond the end of a valid object. So it's the opposite. And lastly, we did some stuff with the build system. So CI now, it tests Windows and Mac and 32-bit and does static check and Go vet and auto releases and a bunch of stuff that comes along with this unified CI system that we have across the org. And yeah, so that's a big release. So go have a look at the changelog for that. It's linked in the doc, or just go to the Go IPLD Prime repo and have a look. The other thing that I can remember having done in the last 2 weeks that's notable is I helped Jaropo get his proposed base 256 emoji merged. So it's a new base encoding, and it's built from emojis. So it's the opposite of what you want a base encoding to be. It's not only not compact, but it's expansive. So it'll turn your bytes into a greater number of bytes for a base encoding. It's a bit of fun, and one of the other reasons, other than fun, that Jaropo proposed for it is that it tests our base encoding implementations to sort of stretch them a little bit and give them a new test case. I just think it's a bit of fun. So you can now get CIDs as emojis, and there's a valid base encoding. I've done a JavaScript version of this. I just haven't merged it yet. It's working and everything in JS multi-formats. I did think it might be fun to get that merged and maybe get it supported onto the CID inspector. That might be fun, but that can come later. CID inspector is a little bit out of date. Yeah, anyway, they're the notable things I can remember. So maybe Mo, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi. I've got a bit more time the next few weeks to work on IPLD stuff. So I'm going to be helping Rod with migrating a bunch of the JS IPLD stuff to use ECMAScript modules more properly. So part of that involves rewriting how TypeScript types get generated. So right now, all of the JS IPLD stuff is using JSDoc, but TypeScript doesn't support JSDoc in dependencies because it sucks. I went and just confirmed that for myself in a test repo, and yeah, it doesn't work. I probably shouldn't just listen to folks, but I'm looking into the existing build tooling for generating those types and just kind of grokking what the existing code base looks like before I propose any changes. But that's something I'll be working on. We also got some new docs that I think are ready to merge for talking about why content addressability is good. So that's going to be in the motivation section of the website. I think probably we'll merge that at the next triage, or maybe I should just do that now. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
I reckon you can do it now. It's really good. I really like that doc. It's going to be a great addition to the website, actually.
Sweet. Yeah. Thanks for pinging me to copy paste all of that stuff and do some minor formatting. I forget who the original writer was, but props to them for doing the bulk of it. Yeah. Other thing I've been working on is helping this team called Ken Labs. I think they were on here a couple weeks ago to put together a dev grant to standardize Prolly trees based on what Michael worked on, which should make it easier to do IPLD-based search indexes. So part of that work is going to be implementing a Go version using ADLs and schemas. And the schemas are going to be really useful so that we can port to other languages down the line. And there's probably going to be a demo library for actually building an index and querying it for arbitrary IPLD data. So that's probably going to start in the next few weeks once it gets approved by the grants team. But hopefully around like January, we'll have something implemented for folks to build off of, which I'm personally very excited for. As well, I've been starting to talk with Lidl about IPLD stuff on the gateway. So recently, I think the stewards team, or I don't remember what team he's on. I think it was stewards. They've put together some specs for the gateway, like actual specifications of here's what an IPFS gateway is and how it works. And so some of the stuff that's been kind of floating around is how do we deal with like arbitrary IPLD data. So right now there's ways to just download stuff as DAG, CBOR, or I think CAR files. But it's, in my opinion, it's a little bit lacking in finesse. And there's just like a lot of opportunity to just make like the IPLD part just usable and easy to use. So some of the stuff we were talking about is adopting patch. So say if you have a writable gateway, you could send a patch set to a given CID, and then it'll spit back a new CID for you to use in your application. So that could make modifying existing IPLD data in whatever encoding a lot easier for an application, especially if you're in an environment where you don't want to have to import like all of Go IPLD prime or the raw bits. So hopefully we'll figure out some rough idea of something there. I'm not sure what the next steps there are. Maybe we'll put together a GitHub issue or start a pull request to the gateway spec or something along those lines, just so that we can start getting commentary on like what makes sense for the community. So right now my thinking is to base it off of some of the IPLD URL stuff I did in the exploration reports earlier this month. I don't know what time is. But so we'll probably start there and then see if we can expand that. I'm probably also going to be doing some non-IPLD gateway spec work to do with writable gateways as part of the work I did for a recent dev grant to do IPFS protocol handlers in the Agrigore browser. So we kind of learned a lot from what is like a nice interface for talking to an HTTP-like interface for like interacting with IPFS. And so we could probably take some of that to IPLD, but also backport some of those changes to the official writable gateway spec. I think that's about it.
Dean, are you ready to go, or you want to keep writing?
No, I'll go. I was just writing more things so people can read them later. All right. I guess some things. So in having nothing to do with IPLD, Go IPFS has been has gotten a new name, which is Kubo. So I will be trying to remember to use which name and slowly getting better over time. There is a Kubo PR that shows using WebAssembly, IPLD codecs, and ADLs, and you just sort of like in your config file, just plop in a file name and the name of the codec or ADL, and it will just load it and then do it for you, which is pretty cool. And there's another step towards like showing how we may want to see how this WebAssembly stuff can work and play out. The BitTorrent directory v1 codec works. You can use that. You can keep nesting through them. You can do the UnixFS thing where you like keep walking through directories and directories until you hit files and then load the file. If some have seen demos, they will look the same as all of the other demos, which is loading a koala. But this one, the koala will be in a directory instead of just at the top level. There's some work going on to clean up the PR that is there and the specs. I also separated out all of the Go code into its own repo instead of living inside of like Go IPFS uses almost nothing special here. It just imports the like WASM IPLD library. And right now it's a single repo that has both some Rust code and some Go code. And you can check out the PR that's there. Sorry if it's a mess, I'm working on it. There is this IPFS thing that is coming up on next month. There's a link in the notes. The event is for maintainers and core contributors of an IPFS implementation, whether you have like a production ready implementation or like you're just getting started. More details and info on the website. And just like if you have not already received an email and you want to go, just like click the RSVP button and fill in some info. I am leading a track that is tentatively called Data Agony and IPFS. And we'll probably have a bunch of conversations related to IPLD things. So if you want to talk about something or you would like to hear other people talk about something, either let me know, or if you have something you want to talk about, just file an issue, a GitHub PR to the website. The website has a here's my GitHub link, and then just go there and then file a PR, and then it will modify the schedule. Yeah, so looking forward to talking about some things with people there. And for all of you who won't be joining, don't worry, there will be recordings and stuff, and we will post the results.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, I'm hoping to get some of this IPLD gateway stuff to be one of the workshops or talks that we have at the event.
Yeah, I feel like to some extent, Data Agony IPFS, which was a name I stole from somebody else who had a concept for this, could also probably boil down to UnixFS. Why is it special? How could it be less special? in that how can we like not put it in a privileged position and allow us to do other sorts of things, so that people can experience the pain themselves. Does UnixFS suck? That's okay. You have a better way to do it. Does that thing also suck? It's okay. Someone will come up with a better one. And we can like work like that instead of needing to decide like UnixFS v2, the ultimate UnixFS must look exactly as the following, which I feel like has been a bad road to go down in the past. Also, there are people who like don't understand why there are block limits and are building things. So we'll talk about why block limits exist and what we can do about them.
Should I go next?
Yep.
I also have some sessions at the IPFS thing on the concept of privacy. It's on that link. We need more people who are interested in it. I need to get my act together in organizing it. Expect some emails and such. One comment, Mob, on the gateway thing. I did at some point get partway through hacking together IPFS shipyard / gateway prime, which separates the core HTTP package of Go IPFS into its own separate repo that only uses Go IPLD prime based interface, and does have the tests basically passing. So it could be plausible to make that a thing that Go IPFS or that Kubo uses, but that other things could also use.
Could you post a link to that somewhere in the notes when you have a chance? Thank you.
Yes. It needs a little bit of work, but I think Lytle was also reasonably supportive of this as a potential path. I posted it as the first thing there. The indexing work, we are looking to add HAMT as the way that we ingest lists of SIDs. It's not quite the right use of HAMTs. We really should use AMPs, but we don't have AMPs at all, and we have mostly working ADLs of HAMTs, so we're going to use HAMTs. But that means we're going to try and get the HAMT implementation over the finish line to really be a default included ADL or closer to that. So we're going to get the reify. We're going to get put in at least in the reifiers of where we're using it, which is in Filecoin markets and in our indexer side code, so that we can have support for the HAMTs and selectors like we have with UnixFS. So that is making some progress. Another thing going on, and again, none of these updates really are me, but are things that I am seeing and writing code reviews for, things like that. There is work on reframe. This is tangential to IPLD as well, and this is the content routing evolution. It is IPLD schema'd, but it's thinking about how do we make these protocols. So it's making use of Edelweiss. And now we're thinking about how we make that cacheable when you're doing gets. And so there's some thought about what is a query versus a mutation, and how do we think about that in these protocols, which is a level above IPLD, but is one of these. How do we extend the IPLD data model into full protocol level things? But there's a good set of conversations going on in IPFS/specs about what that looks like, and Adine has been also driving a bunch of that. And then finally, there is some ongoing work again on cars, making the indexes be able to stream better. So you can expect that to land in the upcoming weeks, which is exciting. I think that's the stuff in my head around IPLD at the moment.
Cool. Mohsin, do you want to give us an update to your amend?
Yeah, so I pushed a few fixes, got it all working, also published benchmarking results. For the tests I've written, I can see at least an order of magnitude improvement in memory and CPU. Might be a little bit of a bias in the test. I'm going to take a look at them again and maybe add more. Also wanted to kind of discuss what the next steps would be and what other things are missing in the implementation that would allow it to replace or like merge into or integrate with the existing patch implementation. So Rod and Mo, you've kind of been interacting with me there. So not necessarily right now, but whenever we get a chance, we can chat in GitHub or where to go with this.
I think maybe it's worth, because this question has come up a couple of times now, to me at least, what the difference is between what you've called amend and what we've currently got as patch. And I've had a couple of different answers for that, but I'd like to hear from you the sort of the motivation and how you've gone about doing this that's different to what is there in patch at the moment.
Yeah. So the name it kind of happened to be amend from my discussions with Eric. Wasn't trying to name it differently, but now that the one in main is called patch, I'm kind of using it as a differentiator to like at least talk about the two implementations separately. But anyway, the main difference in the amend implementation is that it does not, when applying an update, do a bunch of copies. So the way patch does it, it takes the change, copies everything else, and creates a new node with the change applied. And if you apply a lot of updates to a node, there are a lot of copies. Every iteration kind of does the same thing, takes a change, adds everything else around it, and then creates a new node. The way I've done it with the amend implementation, it stores instructions around what to do instead of actually creating the node. And then what it also does is at the time of encode, it presents kind of like a lens, since we've been using that term in IPLD for a bit. It presents a lens to the encoder where it only sees the cumulative result of all the instructions applied together. So you could change everything in the node. All that does is add more instructions, and at the time of encode, when it traverses the instructions, it will just see the result of all the updates applied. So that kind of made it a little more efficient.
So it's essentially like a copy on write.
Yes.
Patch. Yeah.
Yes.
The way I'm seeing patch is the current version is like it's an initial placeholder of the feature, and without people that are interested in pushing it forward, it's going to remain a placeholder. And so your work has some really interesting efficiencies to it. I don't know whether there's a conflict in I mean, there's a potential API conflict there, which is probably resolvable. But maybe it's also just an alternative mode that you can opt into for patch. But I think that the step forward really is in you coming up with a proposal for how to either amend or patch the current implementation. And then we're having a conversation about the API. I think currently with Eric still out until next month, you're the main person that's interested in the feature, so you get a lot of say in how it moves forward. So I think that's really up to you. I like the look of your work. I am interested in how it does fit into the layering approach, because it's like you've gone to the bottom end of it, thinking about how the encode works. But whereas Eric does take this perspective of stepping up in the very much the lens approach of how we look down at this stuff and how does the stuff implement. So that would be something to pay attention to in terms of the API. But yeah, I think it's completely on you to propose a PR, and then let's look at the API differences and what, if anything, we need to do about that, and we can push it forward. So don't keep it in your own branch for too long, and let's get into a PR. And other people, I think, will be interested, because I think patch has a lot of potential, but it's one of these things that it's not going to be interesting until people see it used.
If I may add on to that, I have some opinions on stuff that could be useful, which I think I posted on GitHub. But namely, I kind of see amend and patch as similar things, but like at opposite ends of the interface. So like patch is useful because it's really high level. And it's just like, here we have a patch set, which is represented as IPLD data that can be fetched and encoded and put everywhere. Whereas amend is like very low level and just like, we have these raw nodes and we can do these operations. So it feels like there's a lot of opportunity to have both interfaces as patch for something. Like I could see the gateway making use of the high level API, but then the high level API invoking the low level API to actually make the changes themselves. Especially, I think this will be useful if we have very large patch sets, because right now, if we have like, you know, eager evaluation of all of the patches, it's going to add up a lot. And I guess it remains to be seen how large patch sets will be. But especially if right now we're talking about using it in the gateway, that could be important to have like good performance. I don't know. Like that's just my viewpoint. Yeah. Obviously, it'll be good to talk more.
And there's that point about like you're right, the top down, bottom up. The top down one with like the way that Eric's thought about this is very much if we could show up to and say here's a HAMT and I want to apply a patch to a HAMT, I should be able to just use that as I've got this lens here, I've got a patch set, and the patch set's just updating key values of the HAMT, whereas underneath it's doing all the crazy HAMT stuff. And so we ideally we'd want patch to work from top down in that way. So that's something we need to keep in mind. But amend has the potential to make it more efficient underneath. So that's we should be looking at how to resolve those two things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thanks for the inputs. I was going to say in my head, I was considering patch. I was considering the bottom half of patch only, but patch is more than that. It is the spec and then the operations, handling the operations, applying them. And the way I have code in the PR right now, it kind of takes, it reuses the operations and the schema and all that part of patch, and then just does replaces the traversal package updates that Eric made. Like it is a parallel implementation that goes as far as reusing patch operations, and then underneath. More of the way you've described it is kind of the way it currently works and could continue to work, like replacing the bottom piece of patch with and this implementation. Yeah, cool. We can continue discussing this. I'm excited.
Something I noticed, I guess, while I was doing some of like the WebAssembly stuff, which I don't know, I guess I was reminded a little bit when talking about the different ways that we're trying to do like the modify operations, is even on the read side. So on the read side, the node interface covers like in Go covers we'll call them the big items, right? Like I want to, or the top level things. I want to, you know, bytes. I want string. I want integer, right? And then we were like, well, for the really big things like lists and maps, we'll give you like iterators or something to like help you like walk through them. And then as we've figured like, oh, well, but strings can also be big and like bytes can also be big. So then we've started like adding in things to like make them smaller. But then on the other side, you have this problem where like, I don't have a very good way of like getting all of the entries in a HAMT in parallel, because it'll keep mutating. I can't like do anything in parallel because there's some mutation happening when I get the iterator. So would I have to spin up a new iterator times number of things or whatever? Like there's a lot of things that don't really work if you try and do them that way, right? And I think trying to figure out like some of the story around whether it's parallelism or just we'll call them bulk operations on the read side is the other part of this. Because again, you've got I want to do the things at the very high level, not think too hard about them. And then there's like, I want to get everything like as low down to the individual pieces as possible, right? We have that both on the right side and on the read side. This is part of the reason why the WebAssembly stuff is not going to be, it needs to have sufficient versioning in it, because we are not going to get the interfaces right the first time or the second time or the third time, right?
Then we'll live with all of the old versions in parallel in perpetuity.
Depends how you slice it and deal with it. But yeah, I mean, that's one of those things to deal with. At this IPFS thing, there are some people who are very excited to talk about WebAssembly things, and I'm sure that kind of stuff will come up. If you have opinions and you want to talk about them and you build some stuff, you should be there and then express them. If you can't make it, that's okay. Express them asynchronously, and some of us will convey them on your behalf. And no decisions are getting made there. We're just coming back. We'll report what happens. Don't worry, you haven't missed the boat if you're not there.
I have another quick topic. If anyone wants to talk about patch or amend a bit more, we can do that. But otherwise, I can move on. Yep. Okay, so I've got a link in the docs. Go IPLD Prime issue number 443. Hannah and I have been laying out a set of concerns around performance and memory. And I see this as, I think this is going to become important very quickly. Because in the work we've been recently doing in the the Filecoin data transfer stack that heavily uses bind node. So we've been using that as well, I've been using it as a way to push forward bind node and Go IPLD Prime. We've been sort of replacing Seaboard Gen with Go IPLD Prime in a lot of places. It's really simplified code, and it's sort of pushed a lot of the concerns about encodings into Go IPLD Prime rather than pulling them into the code base itself, which is really nice. But it leaves us with some problems that I think are going to bite us sooner than later. And they're outlined in this discussion thread. And the basic frame of this is there's a 3-layered decoding thing that happens in this stack where, and it's to do with this sort of a plug-in type of approach that this data transfer stack has. So what happens is GraphSync is a generic protocol that can talk about graphs. And so it's got its own messaging format, and we use BindNode for that, and Seaboard, tag Seaboard, which is great. But BindNode has these extensions in the messages. So there's this little spot where any consumer or user of BindNode can register an extension and say, hey, when you're talking back and forth between server and client, you're going to be getting these extensions, and I know how to deal with them, but you don't. So GraphSync doesn't know how to deal with these extensions, so they're just any. So in schema language, they are any nodes, and so GraphSync doesn't know, and it's got these any's, and then the user of GraphSync, and in the Filecoin case, it's Go Data Transfer is the library. It pulls these extensions out and then it says, I'll grab this any, and I will turn them into my message format. So data transfer has its own message format that it extracts from these any nodes. Then data transfer does something very similar where because it has to deal sometimes in payments and other authorization things, it has these vouchers that it puts inside its own messages, and it doesn't know what's in the vouchers. So the user of data transfer does. And so the vouchers are any nodes as well. And then the user of data transfer will say, hey, you're going to be passing back and forth vouchers in your messages, and I know how to deal with them. So it takes those eddies and turns them into concrete types. And with bind node, we can turn them into Go types really, really nicely. So we just we pass them through bind node and we get these Go types. It's really nice to deal with. But what it means is that in Go IPLD Prime, from the beginning, when we're decoding the CBOR, when we hit the any, we drop back into basic node. So instead of using bind node to write the data directly into the Go types, so we sort of skip basic node completely, and we're not creating these nodes, we're creating Go type values, which is really nice. That's efficient. But we hit the any's and we have to switch to basic node, and so we create this basic node structure. And sometimes that can be large. and then we go up a level and we turn that basic node structure into a Go type, and then we sort of hang on the remainder bits off that, and then we do it again. And so we end up with the Go types all the way up for all of the data. But because while we're still dealing with the message, that basic node structure is still alive until the message is done with. So already we're seeing in some heap dumps that that basic node is taking up a lot of memory. And it's also inefficient, because one of the points of bind node is that you could write directly to the Go type, but now we have these basic node structures just hanging around that we use to re-encode, but it's inefficient. So there's some back and forth in that. Well, there's a minor discussion in that thread about possible ways of dealing with this. The ideal is that there would, because we know at runtime when we start what the full schema is and what the translation is, but we don't have any way of putting it all together because it's initialized in these 3 different places. So we've got to figure out a way to put it all together at the beginning and have the base layer be able to say, okay, I've got to the any, but I know who to defer to deal with the any, and I don't have to go to basic node. So yeah, I think this bit of work is going to come up very soon. It's probably going to be on my plate as something to deal with my sort of half-time IPLD stuff. But if anyone's interested in this problem, because I think it's actually a really interesting problem, and there's a lot of, I think that one of the biggest challenges here is the API, making the API nice, because we can hack it together internally, but the API, without some care, could be very ugly and messy. So I think if anyone wants to engage, then API discussions would be the most helpful there. But yeah, anyway.
Would this have been easier for you if the schemas had support for like a union with like any at the end, like we have for like we made up for the reframe stuff, even though it doesn't really exist?
I don't think so.
Because the schemas, like, because then you would have schemas for everything, right? Because at least in GraphSync land, you don't. If I have an extension that you don't have, you're just going to be like, yo, what the heck's happening? And like drop my connection or something, or drop my stream. Right. So because you know everything end to end with the schema, you shouldn't need any basic nodes anywhere, because you know everything. It's only because of the any's that you have to do this basic node business.
Yeah, but it's how do you wire it up? Because yeah, we could have a union with an any, but we still need to put something in there. One complication is that I think that GraphSync will still allow unknown extensions. It's not going to drop you messages if it doesn't understand your extensions. It just won't do anything with them. So there is a legitimate any there that may end up being a basic node. But what we really want to be able to do is, because we set up with bind node at the beginning saying here's the schema for the messages and here's the types, and put it all together. And then it's only later on that the other layers come in and say, hey, you've got this, can you give me the node? And I'm going to decode it. So GraphSync uses DAG-CBOR, whereas the other layers, they will use, it's like, I think they use datamodel.copy or IPLD.copy or a sign node. No, they use a sign node. So instead of using the codec, they're using a sign node to do it. And we really want to get rid of the assigned node. So it means pushing it all down. And I don't think an any union would be useful, although I still do think the any union is an interesting case that we should push forward to figure out. But I don't think it's for this. It's something. It's more something like one of the ways I've proposed is two separate things that need to be solved here. But one of them is I think one of the easier parts to solve would be to have a programmatic typed prototype for a union, where instead of doing it up, in schema and ahead of time, you have this union type that you can add things into. And the keyed union would be the obvious way to solve this. Would be you create a type node with some API, and then you say, now add a key and my prototype for that key. And so you've got this bundle that has these collections of arbitrary prototypes, whatever they are. They could be backed by Binode or CodeGen or whatever. But API wise, you're registering a key for that union and by type prototype. So when the sort of the node builder hits that, then it knows how to fork that off into the different type prototypes. I think that would solve part of the problem. But then there's other issues to solve there as well.
You could presumably make a extension to basic node that does this for that one, and then pass that in as your prototype, is like the with known types basic map node extended.
Yeah, it would look like a node builder, like a generic node builder.
Yeah.
But it's backed by this sort of forking.
But it
type
seems
protocol.
generic enough that you might want to do this in IPLD prime and not as a hack at the user.
Yeah. And I think the easiest version of this, I think, is a keyed union to start with. But there's other places where this could work, where you've got this programmatic building of a prototype or of a builder. So you could do other kinds of unions, but maybe you could do other things as well. Like I haven't got hypotheticals in my head, but then maybe there's a place in GoIPLD Prime where we put these programmatic builders. Anyway, so just to flag that as a ongoing thing that's probably going to come up sooner than later. Would anyone else like to discuss anything else? Nope. Okay, so we might end the meeting there. So I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And if you want to show up next time, you're welcome to hop on the Zoom or tune in again on YouTube. So